School spirit. We live it as young people, showing pride in our high schools, colleges, and universities. We dress in the colors, wave banners, signs, towels, handkerchiefs, almost anything that will accept an ink image. And what about those items that represent our loyalty to our educational institutions? Some of them are just for the day. They get tossed after the victory celebration, but some of them stay with us, haphazardly stored in a trunk or intentionally tucked away with care to savor the memory. To some degree, those things say where we have been and who we are. A college pennant, a personalized stuffed animal, a jacket, a monogrammed blanket. A company that started in Ames, Iowa, made all of those memories possible for more than 6 decades. In a small town in the Midwest, felt and thread stitched school spirit into our lives from coast to coast in the United States and even into Europe. The products were found in public and private universities, big and small, well-known and obscure. The name of the enterprise? Collegiate Manufacturing Company. At its height, the company had salespeople covering all the continental 48 states, salespeople who called on almost every institution of higher learning. Collegiate Manufacturing Company was a dominant force in the college goods market. Andy Christensen headed the company during that time.
We were up to about 26 or 27 million, somewhere in volume like that. It had to be like early 80, somewhere like that.
How the company got to such an influential level starts much earlier, and it has its beginning in an enterprise of a different name. Collegiate Manufacturing can thank a college town, an old-time department store, very creative artists, and some hard work. At the turn of the century, the university in Ames was known as Iowa State College, and it was a short distance from the commercial district on Main Street where Tildens, a department store, was located. In 1904, Tildens was emblematic of the dry goods and clothing stores of the era, with bolts of fabric, ready-made clothing, and items for personal use. Because the store employed seamstresses to alter garments or even make new garments, it was a natural place for college organizations to seek help in making banners and pennants. A Collegiate Manufacturing promotion piece once explained, a fraternity wanted to fly its colors. Seamstresses in the back room of Tilden's store produced the pennants. The Tilden store even had a small catalog showing sizes of felt products that could be produced and examples of designs that could be applied to the school spirit products. The summer was a slower time period for seamstresses at Tildens, so the college requests helped fill that interval. Soon the work of creating and producing items was significant enough that Tilden Manufacturing came into being. For several decades, Tilden Manufacturing turned out products for students. Then, in the 1920s and early 1930s, 2 brothers, born and raised in Ames, Iowa, and with the last name of Adams, saw opportunity in the Tilden operation. Jack Adams, son of one of the entrepreneurs and once a salesman and later a financial officer of the company, says Collegiate Manufacturing grew from that Main Street activity.
The concept came from Tilden Manufacturing at the turn of the century, and they were involved with caps and gowns for graduations and pennants.
The year was 1931 when the Adams brothers launched Collegiate Manufacturing. Jack Adams describes the location in downtown Ames.
It was a kind of a Masonic temple building, I think, in the beginning. Collegiate had the basement and 2 floors, and then Mutual Benefit Life office was on 1 floor, then the Masonic temple was the top row.
They bought it from Tilden. Chev and Clint and 3 other men. And then it didn't take just a year or 2, and then Chev and Clint bought them out. They were sole owners of Collegiate.
Eventually, Chev Adams became the president of the company, imprinting his personality on the new endeavor. His nephew Jack remembers him well.
He had a mischievous attitude about him and liked to get involved with fraternity pranks and things like that when he went to Iowa State. He's a real likable guy, but he didn't take care of his health the way he should have, but a lot of us were that way. He was a genuinely nice guy. He was a real extrovert.
In the early 1940s, Collegiate Manufacturing was self-described as a pennant manufacturer in advertisements in Ames telephone directories, and the company produced a lot of other goods for the college market as well. But it was wartime. In addition to their established products, the company took on some serious business. The United States military needed supplies during World War II. Across the nation, civilian enterprises retooled or revamped and started to turn out goods for use in the war zones in Europe and in the Pacific. Collegiate was uniquely positioned with its suppliers and its sewing expertise. They took on the task of making outerwear for soldiers. The heavy, dark coverings were intended to provide some measure of protection from the elements.
Raincoats and ponchos. I remember the production, of course. They had another whole facility in the Lechner building, which is west of the present Octagon building. It was quite a business.
Stacks and stacks of material lined the walls. Rows and rows of women worked on the rain-resistant fabric made with synthetic rubber. They stitched it into garments to be shipped to the military across the world. As a result of their efforts, management and staff at Collegiate Manufacturing Company won the Army-Navy E Award for Excellence in Production of War Equipment. Only 3% of the companies engaged in the war effort received that great honor. In receiving the distinction, they were evaluated on the high quality and quantity of production. They were evaluated on overcoming of production obstacles and avoidance of stoppages of work, maintaining fair labor standards, training of additional labor forces, effective management, good records on accidents, good health, good sanitation and plant protection, and utilization of subcontractors. The award consisted of a pennant for the plant and lapel pins for all employees in the plant at the time the award was made. Getting the pennant and all the other things associated with the awards prompted a large celebration. On March 29, 1944, the auditorium of what was then Ames High School was filled with Collegiate Manufacturing Company staff, plus city and state government officials and military dignitaries. Special programs outlined the festivities, newspapers chronicled the event, and the E Award pennant was raised high. Following the war, the company continued to make banners and pennants, and the company also put school crests and names on clothing. But they also found a niche that no other manufacturer was perfecting. They made stuffed animals called personality pets. A quote from a 1955 brochure says, "A good percentage of the company's annual volume is in the stuffed animals."
Collegiate was really kind of the top. We were the only one that made them in school colors. So you really had a free run there. Then we had a lot of basic animals like Wee Stinker and Little Stinker, and like I said, Cheer Up Patty and Perky and Poochie and all those. Then we imprinted ribbons and put on their neck. Chev used to name all the dogs, and one of the more popular ones we had was Little Fritz, and that was for Kirk Foster. His father's name was Fritz Foster, who ran the Syracuse University bookstore. I had a dog named after me, but it wasn't a very good seller. Poochie was our biggest dog. It was a plush animal with long droopy ears, and that was really a great seller for us. It was plush and soft, and it was filled with foam rubber, and you could squeeze it. And I had a nephew that carried one for 3 years. But his mother had a tough time getting away to wash it.
The niche was established in part due to the creative artists that Chev Adams hired at Collegiate Manufacturing.
George Grooms was a very creative artist, and he dreamed up a lot of the ideas for personality pets, they called them. They went from strictly a cork-filled product. He started getting into plush animals, and they were really pretty unique. They filled them with foam rubber, so they became more cuddly, so to speak. One product was out of poplin, and they called it Otto the Autograph Hound. And some of the hospitals even got involved with that. If somebody's up there with a broken leg or whatever, then maybe the people in the dorm or the fraternity and sorority could actually write on the animal and leave it. And so it was a different kind of gift from, say, flowers or plants or whatever.
George Groom's tradition was soon upheld by a new artist at the company, Jean Figueroa, who came in 1955.
George Grooms came back from the service, and he did many, many things. And I followed in his footsteps. I had never done any sewing of any kind whatsoever. And so I needed some training period to understand, well, how do you make a pattern? How do you design? So I was going to spend some time with George, who made patterns all the time. He was in the process of making a small stuffed animal dog. And so in my whole period of learning, the whole period long was 1/2 hour. That's the time I had to learn how to make patterns, how you get what you want to get, how big to make things. I just pretty much had to find it out for myself. And I did that a lot. There were many of the animals that were a fun experience, like the swan. I did a Sabrina, the swan, and little Sabrina. And of course I tried to make them rather elegant and swan-like, and I thought they worked out well. I'm still amazed that I did some of the things I did, because it just, you know, some of these things are fantastic.
On the corner of 5th Street and Douglas Avenue in Ames, Iowa, the company produced everything from start to finish. Once the artwork was done, then the manufacturing started. Jack Adams describes the setting.
They had a cutting department. You'd get in massive bolts of felt, and they had big cutting machines to cut out patterns.
Dean Hanks was one of the people cutting fabric, and later was the supervisor for the cutting department. He worked for Collegiate Manufacturing for 25 years, starting in 1955.
I started in the cutting department, which is pretty much where I stayed. And the cutting department itself consisted of about 10 or 12 people, and I'm going to assume I started at about $1.25 when we had to make 100 poochies, while we would lay up a spread of material, and it's been prefigured that you could get 2 on a strip, we'll say 16 inches wide, and so you would lay up a whole bunch of it on the table, and every layer had to be turned. If you had 50, 60 layers on it, you'd be surprised how straight this edge actually stands up. You might think it would be, but when they were first sharpened, you could cut like this, and then just like that. You wouldn't even have to pinch them.
And then straight in the corner area where Octagon is now was the sewing room, and they probably had, I'm just guessing, about 50 women on sewing machines, and most of that was putting together the components for the personality pets or the animals. They'd sew them inside out, and then all the seams would be that way, and then you'd take a little prodding stick and turn this way so the seams went in the middle, and then it went downstairs to either be filled with ground up cork or ground up foam rubber.
Dean Hanks said it was a brisk pace for all of the people involved with the construction of the animals and the making of the pennants.
There wasn't much standing around. Seemed like we always had a list of something that had to be done. I guess if we kept up with the sewing machines, it would be considered a good day's work. The room we worked in was on ground level, and I'd say there wasn't a 6-inch step from the sidewalk out in front, which was just off Main Street, and the back door was pretty much the same, and with the front door open and the back door open, that was not too uncomfortable. As I recall, we did have a big fan in there which ran sometimes. Most of the credit goes to the girls. Most of them were older. A lot of them were farm-oriented ladies, and they didn't take a lot of guidance. They knew how to sew, and we didn't really have a quota that they had to do 100 a day or 50 a day. It made it easy for me because I didn't have to stand over anybody, and most of them I would consider my friends.
One of those ladies was Mae Ford, who worked at Collegiate Manufacturing for 50 years. On the celebration of her hiring 5 decades earlier, she told a local radio station about her long tenure there.
It's become just a part of me, you know. I know the work so well, and I know many of our customers, and know what they like, so it's easy for me to do this.
There'd be a row of ladies who, and they were all ladies, by the way, who sat with airbrush guns, and they had pieces of plastic. They would lay them on a t-shirt, sweatshirt, banner, pennant, and airbrush them in the various colors. They were very good at it. They did a very beautiful job.
Pride in workmanship was company-wide.
I always felt proud of what we were doing. I can't remember any time that I ever felt it's not up to standard or anything like that. I always felt good about it. It's a wonderful thing to do something and feel like, yeah, I've accomplished something.
Well-made products were the cornerstone of the company, but it was the sales force that made the difference.
Well, we had good salesmen, too, and they were covering every part of the country. Our salesmen were insatiable. They wanted new designs all the time, and I was more than willing. I wanted to give them new things, and so I would try to come up with some new things. And I had a policy that I would carry a sketchbook with me almost all the time, and I certainly had them at home. And if I'd be sitting doing something else, I would just be scribbling in the pad, trying to come up with new ideas.
When Jack Adams graduated from college, his uncle Chev recruited him in 1956 to be one of the people to sell Collegiate Manufacturing Company products to college bookstores across the nation.
We were pretty well accepted, all right. We had a pretty good reputation. Of course, they've got a National Association of College Bookstores. They have an annual convention, and any selling is building up relationships and trying to get repetitive business, and that's, I think we did a pretty good job of that. We had a lot of different products besides what sometimes I was surprised that they would give you that much time, because, as a matter of fact, that's one of the problems. If you got so many cases to carry in, products to show, I think about that too, and you wonder about getting them all crammed into the car and hauling them in and so forth. It isn't like you got online or whatever.
Andy Christensen, like Jack Adams, started with summer work at Collegiate Manufacturing and became a salesman. Andy later headed up the company.
That summer, I worked at Collegiate down shipping. I took John Armstrong's place while he took Chev's 2 boys up to the lake. And at the end of that summer, they offered me a territory. When I graduated in late January, I immediately went on the road. And I was on the road for 13 weeks before I ever saw anyone I knew. I was the 6th salesman added to the firm. And We had a salesman in the Northeast, one in the Southeast, one in the Southwest, Harry Tithing here, and then a salesman on the West Coast. Well, it was really different because there was, of course, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have computers, and motel, you'd have to figure out where you were going to stay and make a reservation, and you had to stop at a coin phone and call. I always carried a big sample case. And plus I had a rolling rack with all my shirts on. So every time I got out of the car, I had to set up the rack and hang up the clothes and put my big suitcase underneath and my briefcase and wheel it into the store. So that was how you made your calls. It was a lot of good years, you know. But I was happy to get off the road. I just wished I would have had some computers and cell phones. You know, I remember Five Below trying to put money in a coin machine or a payphone to call ahead and make a reservation. That was always miserable, traveling, especially up here in the winter.
Even without the modern digital aids, he was successful. One reason Andy was well known and could make sales was because he always attended the National Convention of College Bookstores. In fact, he never missed a convention for 50 years.
Well, I remember one time at a convention, the lady from BYU came in and gave me a $3,000 order of pennants and banners.
Wow.
I wasn't even my customer, but I had known her from conventions before and worked with her. But she looked me up and had this order, and we sat down, went through that order.
Before Andy came back to the head office in Ames, the last territory he worked was on the West Coast.
Now in California, I had Washington, Oregon, California, Montana, Idaho, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. A lot of traveling. And I lived up in the San Francisco area. I lived in Palo Alto. And I used to leave before Memorial Day and hope I'd get back by the 4th of July. Those days, no cell phones either. No one to talk to, or it was a lot different.
And while there was hard work going on in the art department, the manufacturing floor, and the sales force, there were some outlets for humor and good times.
One of the original coffee groups in Ames was in the basement of Collegiate, and that was called the Coffee Clatch with K's. And they had a fictitious little membership card, keep your eye on the donut, not on the hole, you know, and they all kinds of crazy stuff. But they met every morning, and a lot of business people just kind of drifted in.
The attitude likely came from the top down, as Chev Adams loved a good conversation and a good beverage. In a publicity article for the college bookstores, it also mentioned that he was a keen gin rummy player, and he is quoted as saying he was known as the luckiest in the world.
Well, I always remember old Al Knudsen of University Bank. He'd come down and he'd come in and he'd say, "Shut the door." And then they'd sit there and play gin rummy. And we all used to go up to his office after 5 and have a drink. And that was kind of a tradition. One time he and Al were playing, and I'd heard this cap gun going off earlier in the day, and I didn't think much about it. Anyhow, they used to pull out the little corner on the desk, and that's where they always played their gin rummy. And I think Al ginned on him or something. He says, "Son of a bitch, I ought to shoot you." And he reached in, pulled out the cap gun, and shot it off. Al. Well, of course, there was a few swear words that went on, but that was one of the funnier incidents I remember.
Jack Adams takes some good-natured ribbing about one story involving the mascot for Iowa State University called Sigh. who was really a big red bird. Someone got the idea that the mascot should be bigger than life, so George Grooms designed a large bird constructed with wood and chicken wire covered with felt. The human underneath looked out at the neck slit. Jack was a graduate of the University of Iowa, the chief rival of Iowa State and Sigh.
Ironically, they built that darn thing around me, which is quite an experience. The original Sigh was probably a 7-footer. He went through several changes. I think the original one went, as I remember, went down on the hood of a car to Missouri, and he wasn't in very good shape. So he withstood the rigors of of what all goes on with Sigh.
In addition to colleges and universities, Collegiate Manufacturing Company had some big clients.
We used to do a lot with Disney World. California did. And we printed a lot of shirts here for Disney World. And we were up to about 26 or 27 million, somewhere in volume like that.
In the life of most companies, there are the high points, such as sales figures to nationally known companies such as Disney, and then there are the low spots. In 1968, Jack Adams, who was a pilot of small aircraft at the time, was flying back from western Iowa to Ames when someone was trying to contact him via the airplane communication system.
It was garbled conversation. I couldn't pick it up, but all of a sudden it was very apparent there was something going on the east side of Ames, and there was a lot of smoke. And unfortunately, it was a lightning strike during the noon hour and right on the main building where the sweatshirts were. It was a $500,000 fire at Collegiate Manufacturing on a June Sunday. So that was not a good day. And I made about a 3-bounce landing, and I got the thing down, but I didn't grease the landing very good. That was a tough time.
By this time in the company history, the business had expanded beyond the small manufacturing concern in the downtown area. The warehouse building not only contained finished products, but bolts and bolts of material, all very flammable. An advertisement in the College Store magazine alerted customers to the devastating setback. To the company's credit, despite the destruction of the goods manufactured so far that year, they met their orders for the fall school term. The fire brought the decades of the 1960s to a dramatic close. Earlier in that time period, Chev Adams had died, and A.W. Littlefield, president of Littlefield Adams and Company, became president of Collegiate also. The 1960s saw many changes in the structure of the company, with Collegiate becoming a wholly owned subsidiary of Littlefield Adams. Collegiate now joined Collegiate of Virginia and Pacific Athletic Company in California as manufacturing branches of the larger corporation. During the 1970s, catalogs and annual reports illustrate the heyday of college merchandising.
I remember once telling somebody we made everything that's non-essential for college.
But whether it was non-essential, it was memorable, and college students bought millions of t-shirts, sweatshirts, caps, blankets, pennants, and more, all capturing school spirit and memories for the ages. By the 1980s, the business climate was changing. Many of Collegiate Manufacturing Company's competitors had fallen away because they were finding that goods could not be competitively made in the United States.
We used to buy all of our sweatshirts, for example, out of Virginia. They're no longer producing a sweatshirt. Everything went overseas. So that was one of the big things. Everything started being imported from offshore. Then we got out of the animal business because of insurance, etc.
As the business climate changed, Collegiate Manufacturing returned to its roots, producing principally felt and fiber goods with a small amount of sweatshirts. The manufacturing operations in Ames were closed, but there was a plant in Roanoke, Virginia, making those items.
They finally ended up selling the company off to 2 gentlemen, collegiate off to 2 gentlemen in Roanoke, Virginia that were in the plant, which they're still running it. They still do a couple million a year in pennants and banners. And that's all they make.
And the name had changed. There was no longer a Collegiate Manufacturing. The Collegiate Manufacturing legacy includes a diverse range of products for college life, but the signature items produced more than a century ago are still in the market today.
You'd have to say the pennants and banners. You know, I mean, they're still alive and still going. And like with so many other businesses, a lot of things change. And like so many of our competitors of that day are no longer in business.
A company's legacy can be more than just its output. Jack Adams identified a creative force that was a company hallmark.
It provided people with an idea that they could go out and find a niche out there with something. If you got a creative artist or some people that have got creative ideas. It was throughout the United States, and of course with the labels on the back of a sweatshirt, and every single animal had a Collegiate Manufacturing name sewn into the leg or whatever. So we got a lot of exposure, and people knew who we were.
That's a wonderful thing, to do something and feel like, yeah, I've accomplished something. Because, you know, my goal was to be a fine artist. And so going into commercial art was something I had to do, really. And then to find an area that with so much variety and so much creativity, and then find it in Ames, you know, not in the big city, but in Ames. And those things went all over the world. We had things could go anywhere in the world. And it was exciting.
And the products were part of an exciting aspect of collegiate life. Those cheering crowds at sporting events waved banners and flags, and the students proudly wore their school colors. All of those products bear witness to the vision, creativity, and hard work that stitched up school spirit for more than 6 decades. Collegiate Manufacturing Company.